They had a great 60s. They had a bang up open to the 70s with the 1-2 punch of Sticky Fingers and Exile. Then things got a little weird. Things got kind of head scratching for a while. A little bit of wandering in the desert for a few years for the Stones there in the mid 70s. But to their credit, they managed to come back in 1978 and delivered in the process one of their best albums ever, Some Girls. Which I'm going to talk about today, review today. This came out in June 9th of 1978. I remember it well. I was 14 years old, and this was in the summer between 8th grade and high school for me. So fun times, good memories, and got to number one in the United States, number two in England. I think most of this was recorded in France, some of it probably in America, maybe even some in England. Notable album for a lot of reasons, but one of those being that this is Ron Wood's first album as a full-fledged Rolling Stone in which he participates in the entire album. He had been a little bit involved in It's Only Rock and Roll and a little more involved in the Black and Blue album, the last album before this. But here he's a full-time member of the band. Also notable for the lack of guest musicians and session musicians for the most part. There's a few, but they're pretty much all their 70s albums had Billy Preston, Nicky Hopkins, Bobby Keys, just a ton of extra players and guest musicians all over the album, which, I mean, in a lot of cases worked really well. But here, the Stones kind of stripped back to the original Stones model. It's more or less just the band. You do get Sugar Blue, a blues guy that plays harmonica on a couple of tracks, which is good because he really lends some greatness to those songs, wonderful touches. But a few other guest musicians, but for the most part, it's just the basic Rolling Stones band for the first time in ages. So, yeah, great album. But this, by the way, is one of the few of their albums that I don't have a vinyl copy of. This is the deluxe CD version that came out about 10 years ago. That's the regular album and then a bonus disc of other tracks. So used to have this on vinyl, used to have it on cassette way back when, but now I just have the CD for now. So the last three albums before this, Goat's Head and It's Only Rock and Roll and Black and Blue, certainly had their moments, but they certainly had their down moments too, and their filler. The Stones seemed kind of lost, not sure what they were supposed to be anymore at times, kind of, which is no surprise because the solo Beatles, they all went through the ups and downs in the 70s. A lot of the other bands that were big in the 60s were kind of not sure what to do in the 70s and had their Dylan and so forth, and had their not so great moments. So wasn't just the Stones, but more than anything, and even though some of the songs on those albums were good, some were even great, but a lot of times the Stones during that mid 70s period just didn't really seem like their heart was into it, and didn't seem like they were having a whole lot of fun making music anymore at that point. But again, to their credit, they kind of got their back up against the wall a little bit, maybe. And he had Jagger going off in the jet set celebrity, getting married, and more interested in sort of that stuff. Keith's drug use increasing, unfortunately. And by 1978, by the standards of 1978, which sounds kind of funny to say now because all the rock and roll stars now are in their 70s and 80s, but in the late 70s, the Rolling Stones were in their late 30s, and man, they were getting really old in the minds of a lot of people. And so, but they bounced back. They made a good, great album. And kind of along those lines, I don't remember back when I was in grammar school, when I was in grade school, I love the Beatles. I loved the Rolling Stones. Really got into them probably 6 months or a year before this album came out. I always knew who they were before that, but I really started to get into them when I got Hot Rocks and the Ruby Tuesday single and all that. Kind of talked about that on earlier videos. But But all the other kids in my class, everyone knew who the Rolling Stones were. Everyone knew Satisfaction and Jumpin' Jack Flash and Honky Tonk Woman. And I'm sure some of the kids in the class probably dug Angie or It's Only Rock and Roll. But the Stones were they were there, but they weren't a band that was in the forefront. I remember the kids in my class, they were into Led Zeppelin and Elton John and Peter Frampton, Boston, Kiss, the Eagles, Fleetwood Mac, Bee Gees, stuff like that. The Rolling Stones were sort of they were good back in the day. In fact, I remember because I was such a Beatles fan that I would get ragged on here and there from kids for liking that old timey music, that old music from way back, like 5 years ago. Because 5 years ago when you're a little kid is a long, long time. And, why didn't I, they were okay back in the day, but why don't you get into the good bands like, Meatloaf and Foreigner or whatever. And so, yeah. And as they had been through most of the 70s with this album, they're still following trends. They're no longer really setting the standards or defining the moments like they had been in the 60s. And probably with this album, that might have scared them a little bit. Black and Blue didn't do that well commercially. I mean, it got to number one, but so did It's Only Rock and Roll, but they weren't the major hits that Let It Bleed and Exile and Sticky Fingers had been, and their 60s stuff. So they were probably kind of feeling the heat, maybe feeling that they were getting a little old themselves. The heat's on because of Keith Richards' heroin bust in Canada in 1977, the year before. Disco's huge. Punk rock's coming on, more so in England than in America at this point, but it's still coming on. And so this album is great for many reasons, but one being that instead of that sort of at loose ends, murky, unfocused feeling that they seem to be going through in the mid-70s, for the first time in a long time, the band once again feel desperate, hungry, kind of snotty again like they were when they were younger, determined again. Some of that might be artifice, but it worked and it felt good. Nobody was going to seriously confuse these guys at this point with the Clash and the Sex Pistols and the Ramones and those type of bands. But it worked for me, the 14-year-old version of me, and for my buddy John, who had also really gotten into the Rolling Stones, and they were his favorite band by this time. He lived next door to me, grew up with me, and we just loved it. And this was just a great album, quintessential summer album, and one of the best ever summer songs. I hate summertime because I live in Texas. It's miserable, but can't deny just one of the best summer hanging out albums and a great summer song we'll get to here in a minute. It's also an album I think was the last time that the band really felt maybe a little nervous and they felt pushed and in need of trying to prove themselves a little bit, and I think they do that here. After this, they made good albums, still a few good albums, but I don't think they ever really tried again after this. I think past this, they just said, oh, hell, we're the Rolling Stones. We're going to do what we want. Like us if you like us. If you don't, screw off, whatever. But sounds like they really tried on this album, and sounds like they had a blast listening to it. It's a blast making it. It certainly was a blast to listen to. It just rocks like a bastard. 43 years up later, it holds up really well. And one thing I was thinking about, because I've been listening to this all week in order to do the review, the old Beatles versus Stones thing, and it hit me. There's a lot of things they do on this album. There's a lot of things they do on a lot of their other albums and singles that you could just never imagine the Beatles having done, or John, Paul, or George solo having done. And conversely, there's a lot of things that the Beatles and the solo Beatles do that you could never have imagined the Rolling Stones doing. And you can take that even further, that there's things that the Kinks do or the Who do that you can't imagine anyone else but them doing, or any other mix of bands. My point being that, yeah, we all have our favorite bands and our rankings, and that's great. You know, you might prefer Stones over Beatles, Beatles over Stones, Who over all of them, or whatever. But just hit me that I'm just glad that we have these great bands back in the day, these unique bands, because we certainly don't have many unique bands around or interesting bands around nowadays. But I'm just glad they're around and they all offered and did what they could do best, what they did best. And so you had all this great music to enjoy and pick from. And, I'm glad the Beatles exist and the Stones exist and all those bands, and I love them all. So, just a little aside here. In a lot of ways, this is a Mick Jagger centric album. Keith was still dealing with his legal problems and so forth. He's here, he's a little more focused. He certainly participates in the album, but in a lot of ways, this feels like a Mick album. And in this case, it's to the benefit because it all works out. This classic Jagger acting the fool and having fun and singing as only he can sing and performing as only he can perform and coming out with some really good songs. There's some great songs on the three albums before this. This is pretty much top to bottom classic songs, and this album I think is markedly overall better than the three albums that came before it. This album's also just rich in snippets. It's just an embarrassment of riches of snippets. And what I mean by that is, I don't know, 5-10 years ago I did a VC contest asking people to name their favorite snippets from songs. And snippets, my definition, is like, 1 to 10 second little bit of a song that just hits you in the sweet spot, hits your heart, the part of the song that you always look forward to and love hearing. It's da 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 da, the opening chords of You Really Got Me. It's Look Out, Look Out, Look Out in Leader of the Pack. It's that little couple of seconds of silence and No Matter What. It's it's just a lyrical aside, a funny lyric, an odd noise in a song, a particular drum beat or piano run or guitar lick, or just that little just several seconds little slice of a song that you always love. And this album is just full of them. So I'll mention some of those as we go through the songs individually. So Miss You came out in May, right at the end of 8th grade for me. I loved it right off the bat, and my buddy John loved it right off the bat. And then summer came, and this comes out in June, and just fell in love with the album. I remember I went to Chicago. My family went to Chicago on vacation that year, and actually got to go to the first Beatle Fest I ever went to. I went to one in '78, went to one in '81, also in Chicago. It's the only two I've ever been to. But instead of flying, we drove up there. We've got family and so forth up there, and I just remember Miss You being all over the radio on the way up there. And it was another aside. I mean, I feel for kids today who grew up never having regular radio that didn't totally suck. I mean, back in our day, radio, played crap songs. They always did, but just so many good songs. And I just remember being in the car going up there. Miss You was on the radio all the time. Take a Chance on Me by ABBA, FM by Steely Dan, Baker Street, Runaway, Jefferson Starship, Grease Is the Word, You're the One That I Want. Just a whole bunch of great songs. And punk rock and new wave hadn't really hit America, or at least not my part of Texas and all yet. That would come in the next year or so, but and that would be great too. But just back when they had good songs on regular radio stations, and it wasn't just crap of classic rock recycling the same 30 songs over and over, or pop radio stations that just play American Idol shit. Back when you had pop songs and hit songs were actually could be good songs instead of crap songs. Anyway, so yeah, I remember that. And I also remember it's cool because in Chicago, they were on tour when all this was happening, when I was going to Chicago for vacation. And I remember they were coming to Chicago to play Soldier Field. I was hoping I could get a ticket and go while I was up there, but my parents needed to get back home, and we were leaving like 3 or 4 days before the concert. So I was like, son of a bitch. We get home, and news comes that the Stones are coming to Fort Worth and they're playing Will Rogers Auditorium, which is a great place to see a show because it only holds like 1,000, maybe 1,500 people. But being the Rolling Stones, obviously it sold out in 2 minutes. So I didn't get a ticket and ended up getting to see them until 1981. I remember a couple of months later, I started ninth grade, and there was a kid in the same grade as me. He would come. He would have just different. You could buy your concert shirts. He would just have different one pretty much every day. Later, learned that he was a rich kid, and his dad was some muckety muck with. I don't think Ticketmaster was a thing yet, but with the ticket agency or with something. But anyway, the kid could go to concerts free in Dallas and Fort Worth. So he was always going to concerts pretty much every weekend, saw everybody. And one day he came in with a Rolling Stones shirt from the '78 show at Will Rogers. I was like, man, you got to see the Stones. That must have been cool. And he's like, yeah, it was cool. It was all right. It's like, damn, man, this guy, like, doesn't dislike the band, doesn't really like them, kind of care less. And it was just sort of a blasé, yeah, guess I'll go to the show. And here, I really wanted to see him and wasn't able to. But anyway, so loved it. Just albums is filled with energy, fun, a lot of hooks. There's a couple of lesser songs on here, 2 or 3 lesser songs maybe, as compared to what else is on here. But I really love every cut. The album, a lot of songs are 4 minutes or more, but the album overall just feels short and sweet, just punch after punch. It's got just enough variety to it. Funny about the cover there, I remember seeing those when I was a kid in stores, those kind of ads for wigs. Not that I was interested in buying wigs or anything, but just remember seeing those in some of the, usually kind of like in the crappier stores or whatever, in the windows of stores and stuff that they use that to take off of. So, with the Black and Blue album before this, I don't think I mentioned that in my review last time. There was some controversy about the ad, the billboard that ran in, was put up in, I think, California, New York. The girl bound up and tied up and beaten up and says, I'm black and blue for the Rolling Stones, and I love it. A lot of people got sort of up in arms about that. And I remember seeing, might have been in National Lampoon magazine or something, there was a parody of Mick Jagger tied up and beaten black and blue, and women sitting there pointing and laughing at him. That was kind of funny. But controversy with this album, too, wouldn't be the Rolling Stones if there wasn't controversy swirling around them. That's sort of their stock in trade. So the cover, and I don't remember exactly the details. I think I might have had the album that was the original cover, but that's why there's some of the faces that don't have any faces in them, because they had used, I think, Lucille Ball and I don't remember who else, and they ended up not going and getting permission or whatever, and certain people were outraged that they were on a Rolling Stones album and demanded to be taken off, and that's why they had to print another cover with these under construction things and the wigs with the faces missing. So there was that. And there was also the cover about some girls and the black girls just wanting to have fun all night line and so forth. So we'll get into some of that. So side one, Miss You, number 1 hit in America. I think it got to number 3 in England. Perfect. People call it their disco song, but I think it's just a perfect balance, perfect mix of disco, dance, and rock music. Maybe their final masterpiece song. I don't know. Might be some on this album that are masterpieces too. Might even be some on Tattoo You, but one of their overall masterpieces. I just love the song. Always have. It's been played to death, played into the ground, but I still love it. Slinky, sultry, again, perfect summer song, and the choo 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 chick 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 chick. I love those little sides. One of my little favorite snippets. The "What's the matter with you, boy? Why?" Kind of falsetto Mick bet at the end. Is he singing about Bianca, or is this just made up about no one? I don't know, but it's a great song. There's a longer version that came out. The version on the album is like 4 minutes and change. There's a longer version. I could do with a 20-minute version of this. I love it. I remember also another side is that they promoted this album by appearing on Saturday Night Live, and so we were all excited about that. And my buddy John, like I said, next door, and his brother, little brother, came over and we were watching that. And my mom was in there watching it too, not because she was a Stones fan. She was old, built, born in 1925, so she was more Sinatra and Bing Crosby and all. She knew, I love the Beatles, so she knew who the Beatles were and basically all that. She knew who the Rolling Stones were, but they weren't of her generation, so she didn't really know. And so they came on and play on Saturday Night Live, and I just remember my mom sitting there like, the hell? And, she looked over at us and said, so you really like these guys? We're like, yeah, the Stones are cool. And she's sort of like, yeah, okay. So that was funny. But anyway, Miss You, great song. It gets a 10, even though it has been played into the ground. It's still solid 10. Next song is When the Whip Comes Down, kind of the grinding classic Stones song with some punk attitude thrown on top for good measure and because of the times. It may be one of the minor tracks on this album, but it's still great. It's got the growling mean guitars. It's midway through it sort of revs up pace, and if you're driving it becomes a turn it up and hit the pedal type song. Just check it out. That's another one of the great snippets in the song. Yeah, I mean, compared to the other songs on here, it's a bit minor, but I'm still going to give it a 9.6. It's still a great song. Then we get the only cover on this album, Just My Imagination Running Away From Me, which the Temptations originally did back in, I don't know, 66 or 7. Might have the date wrong there, but back in the 60s. Temptations version is great. I do remember I had heard the Temptations version. I keep going back to my buddy John. He heard this first and didn't hear the Temptations version till a year or two later. And when he heard it, he was like, "That's awful." I think the Temptation version is great. I think this version is great. I think they're great for totally different reasons. I love the crisp, echoey guitar sound on here. I'm not a musician, so I can't really talk music with any intelligence as far as instrumentation and all, but just that sort of crisp sound. One of their best covers, I think it's their best cover song of the 70s. Now they did a whole lot more covers in the 60s than they did in the 70s, but they did covers on most of their albums, and I think this is their best one of the 70s. They take the Temptations version and kind of make it their own, the way the Beatles did with cover versions. Like the way Keith Mick sings Family, another one of those snippets. Great backup vocals from Keith. Maybe that's Ron Wood in there too. Goes from a ballad to a rocker. It's got nice bass parts here and there. Runaway, 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 run, 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 run. Another great snippet. Anyway, Just My Imagination. It's a 10. It's a solid 10. Now we get to the title track, Some Girls. That guitar opening with Sugar Blues harmonica coming in, which blues harmonicas on all over Miss You too to great effect. But here, just a great opening to the song. Great guitar tone and sound. Funny as hell. Some Girls Give Me Children I Never Asked Him For. American Girls Want Everything in the World You Can Possibly Imagine. I've met some of those girls, so I can attest to that. The Black Girls controversy and certain radio stations banning the song and other people getting upset about that. I don't know. Maybe with rightfully so, maybe not. I think it's all in fun and just a joke. I do remember also on Saturday Night Live during one of the news segments, Garrett Morris, back when he was on there, and he came on and thought he was going to be all indignant about talking about the song, and he finally says, "All right, Mick Jagger, all I've got to say to you is, where are these girls? Where can I find them? Do you have phone numbers? Get in touch with me so I can get these girls." So that was really funny. But yeah, baby, why don't you please come home? And just there's even buried in the mix just the tiniest bit here and there of a Baroque sound, sort of harken back to their Between the Buttons albums that I hear in here. Maybe it's just my imagination running away with me while I'm hearing the song, but a little bit of a harmonium or something in there on top of just the great rocking song. And so yeah, just another great song. It gets a 10. Lies, high octane punkish workout, kind of another minor track on the album. One of the actually the second shortest song here, but it's a little generic, but it's a lot of fun. The lyrics are fun. Your wicked tongue does feel a little samey throughout the song, but it does have its groove, that's for sure. Lies, you dirty Jezebel, why don't you go to hell? So just some great, funny, crazy Mick Jagger lyrics. That 6-beat bump, 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 punch out is great. I'm going to give Lies an 8. And so, if this was an album, I'd turn it over, but it's a CD. But nonetheless, we go to side 2. Far Away Eyes, the Stones' requisite country song that they seem to have on every one of their 70s albums, more or less. But most of the time, the Stones do country. It's sort of tongue-in-cheek, kind of cornball. Mick just hamming it up and having fun. Sweet Virginia is probably their most straightforward take on country sound. This, though, is country. This, though, is cornball as hell, but it's also comes off as kind of sincere at the same time. So it's just a nice little balancing act. Musically, it's pitch perfect. I'm not a huge country fan, but I love this song. It's a lot of fun. Kind of like Dead Flowers, and even more fun than Dead Flowers. It's kind of got that Bakersfield country sound, and just got to laugh throughout the song. I mean, I ran 20 red lights in his honor. That cracks me up every time. Keith singing along is just so sweet. For someone who can't sing worth a damn, he sure sings great with a lot of heart and soul every time he opens his mouth. I love the Jaggers hick, the well, in the middle of the song. Send $10 to the Church of the Bleeding Heart of Jesus somewhere in Los Angeles, so I did. And then get a girl with, well, you know what kind of eyes she got. Anyway, great. And I think they did this on the 78 tour at several of the stops. So Far Away Eyes, another 10. A lot of 10s on this album. Now, just interject here that all 10s are not equal. So there are Rolling Stones albums from the 60s and from the early 70s that I would rate higher than this album, even though I would give those albums a 10. And you'll see what I'm going to give this in a few minutes. We've probably already figured it out. But, you know, so there are better Stones albums than this, but this is up there and one of the great ones all the same is what I'm saying. Respectable, yet another minor cut. Kind of how the Stones are more respectable now than they used to be. Oh, how times change compared to the early 70s and the 60s. It's a very New York and American-centric album. And if you didn't know, you'd hardly know that these were British guys because, you know, Mick sings so crazy that you can't really tell he's British half the time. But anyway, still great album. Driving Rock, punk feel, pretty good. Probably the least interesting song here. It's most straightforward song here with no real frills whatsoever. So respectable, good song. I'm going to give it a 7. Now we get the always needed and always welcome Keith song of the album. This one, Before They Make Me Run. Love the guitar, the opening riff. Maybe Keith's best song. It's either this or Happy. I never can make up my mind. I love both. Another Goodbye to Another Good Friend might be in the fun of the funny bits or the whatever the song. There's a little bit of heartfelt, bittersweet because, you know, maybe he's talking about Brian or Graham Parsons or people lost. Watch My Taillights Fading. There's not a dry eye in the house. They're laughing and singing, and, you know, Find My Way to Heaven because I did my time in hell. Wasn't looking too good, but I was feeling real well. About a minute and 50 seconds in, there's a nice tempo change in the song that gets me every time. Kind of another moment, another snippet. Love Keith harmonizing with himself toward the end of the song. Love at the very end of the song. There's Before They Make Me Run that Keith sings in as falsetto as Keith Richards could get. Nice little touch. Great song. It gets a 10. I sold it. I wish I still had it. I had the 45 in the picture sleeve for this, which was never released commercially, but it was a promo sent out to the radio stations with the 45 in the picture sleeve. I think it had Run Rudolph Run on the flip side. as I remember. I'm not sure, but anyway, wish I still had that. Was a cool picture of Keith on the sleeve. All right, from Before They Make Me Run, it gets a 10. I think I already said Beast of Burden. Is this a ballad? Is this a rocker? I never could make up my mind on that either. I'll just say yes, and it's both. Mick's pleading voice is great. This is another. I almost had a chance to get the picture sleeve for this back around 78 or 79. I used to in the pre-internet, pre-eBay days back then. Would send off for these people selling records and memorabilia in the back of like Trouser Press and Rolling Stone, and get these, photocopied lists of people selling stuff. And I remember one of the places, I don't remember the name of the company, but it came out of San Francisco, a girl who sold Beatles and Rolling Stones and just all sorts of rock and roll records and memorabilia. And she had Beast of Burden picture sleeve for sale for $50. Well, I was 14, I had $50. And I kind of thought, man, that's a lot. Wish I would have bought it, because the picture sleeve was withdrawn and never actually released commercially, but several of them got out, and those things are worth like $2,000 or $3,000 now. So wish I would have had $50 back then and would have picked one up. But anyway, back to the song. It's a great song, full of snippets again. Pretty, 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 pretty girl. There's no way that anyone could not love this song. The ooh, pretty, pretty girl. This isn't so much punk, disco, or dance music. It's just kind of straightforward Rolling Stones. Just a great song, just a wonderful song. And so Beast of Burden gets a 10. The album ends with Shattered, mixed and that great guitar tone at the start of the song runs throughout the song. That's some kind of effects pedal that he's playing through, Keith, I guess. Again, I don't know music enough to know what the hell he's doing there, but I just love it. I mean, it just sounds so great, sends my soul soaring every time I hear the guitar in Shattered. I love the line, people dressed in plastic bags, some kind of fashion. Mick, taking the piss out of the whole punk rock crew who had been making fun of the Stones for being dinosaurs. Chitter chatter, success, success, success. Mick yelling, hoop shadoobie background vocals. Mick screaming. Just a great sing along song. Great song. Don't mind the maggots. Flatta, flatta, flatta. Pile it up, pile it up. Love the cold ending. Just the sudden cut off ending. Kind of reminiscent of I Want You, She's So Heavy on the Abbey Road album. This is a better song than I Want You, She's So Heavy though. This gets a 10. This had a really cool picture sleeve too. On the flip side of the Shattered 45s, not on the album, was a song called Everything Is Turning to Gold, which is kind of a disco Latin feel with pretty cool guitar. A little bit repetitive, kind of unfocused and busy song. I don't know that it really would have worked on this album, but it's got nice twists and detours, and even though Everything Is Turned into Gold is not officially part of this album, it may be on the bonus disc there, I'm pretty sure it is, I'll give that one a 7. It's kind of a fun song. I'm not going to go through all the bonus material, but the album gets a 10. I remember Rolling Stone had done a review of this and of Street Legal by Bob Dylan, and kind of gave him poor reviews. And then a month or so later, they came back and re-reviewed both and gave both good reviews, which they deserve because they're good albums. Probably that was Jan Winter just brown-nosing as he usually does because he's an idiot. But anyway, great album, great memories of this coming out in 78. And this was sort of the first brand new Stones album that I really got into because I remember Angie, I remember It's Only Rock and Roll, but I didn't buy those albums at the time. And this was the first one that I bought when it was brand new. And just kind of a soundtrack of that summer album. We played this thing to death. And a lot of these songs, like I said, have been since driven into the ground on classic rock radio. Beast of Burden, Miss You, Shattered to some degree. But doesn't mean they're still not great. And yeah, top to bottom, it's a 10. It's a solid 10, and definitely check it out if you haven't. So I'll be back with Emotional Rescue sometime soon, and